Welcome back to the digital workplace. We are here talking about digital workplace tools with my two favorite people. We have Vonda Page and we have Vijay Anand. Vonda, how are you today?
I am doing great. So happy to talk about another digital workplace tool today.
Yes, me too. Vijay, what's new in your world?
Since life is going on, I guess.
Life is life. Continues to go on. Cool. I'm excited today. This actually came out of our last review. We kind of mentioned this. So we're going to be talking about Twist today. Twist is not, I would say, like a full out digital workplace platform. It's a messaging platform. But we're going to use it more as a case study to look at what can be done to compare like synchronous versus asynchronous tools. What one tool or one function can look like with two different thoughts behind it. Often Twist pits itself as like an anti-Slack and its messaging, which we'll look at in a second. Vonda, did you have any like preconceived notions going into Twist about what it was or what you thought?
So first, I'm going to give the disclaimer that I am a Slack addict. And so I think that, as we look at these different tools, one of the things is to look at them in the context of, our common experience and the things that we use most often. And so I wanted to kind of start with that because my initial thought is, me being a person that is always communicating and always having several different conversations, with different people, even though we may be talking about the same topics. One thing that I do like is the very focused concentration on threads, right? So to be able to keep the focused piece of the conversation. However, though, when you are used to using multiple tools at the same time, that thought around where this is going to fit in and how to derive the value out of it, I think is what's important to think through and figure out.
Yep, we'll definitely hit that. So maybe for you leading into this, Twist is for people who can't keep up with Slack.
That sounds like about right.
All right, Vijay, what did you know about it before trying it out?
So I kind of got a context that this was a slightly different take on Slack. I was very curious to figure out how different it was and how they had, what is the philosophy that went behind designing something like this, right? And I think it's very clear that they want to basically let people take control of the time rather than basically being driven by what teammates are basically pushing you to commit and all those things. And I think there is this need to keep up with everything going on as if everything depended on real time. Like my father says, things went on when there was just landline as well. So I think sometimes we kind of take things for granted, saying that people would send you an email, then they would send you a WhatsApp message saying that have you got the email that I just sent you? And I think this is a very interesting tool which kind of takes a different take on it. This is aimed at people who are rethinking work. I think it's not really for folks who basically just want to keep working and enjoy working, continuously. But this is slightly a different take on how to do work. And I think for that experiment, I think I have a lot of appreciation for it.
Yeah, good context. Let's start off just looking at the website, the homepage here. Okay, so here's their homepage. It is probably important to know even at this point that Twist is part of a company that also does Todoist. So it's the same company that I think Doist is the name of the company that does both these. Todoist is more of a task management / project management tool that can be used for organizing work, whereas Twist is more the messaging side of things. So they're leading here. Work is changing. Messaging should too. Twist is async messaging for teams burned out by real-time, all-the-time communication and ready for a new way of working together. So very clear that Twist is not something you start with. Twist is usually something you end up with because you're leading into things. You can see at the start they're talking about async. Async is everywhere. Talking through this, talking about the asynchronous revolution. They're really pitching this hard. That async is a better way. I don't know if they would say a more mature way of working. Vonda, I know you're a big Slack fan, so what do you see when you see this? Do you think they're hating on Slack too much?
Well, so I think it's like it's two different approaches, right? Because I think when you think about the work culture and the culture of the digital workplace, I think it's a couple of ways to think about it. So from the one standpoint, right, I think about the synchronous communication where you are part of several teams. So whether you're a project, manager, program, lead, product, or whatever, if you're on several teams in your normal course of work, you're going to be involved in multiple threads and multiple conversations. Now,
Mhm.
the asynchronous advantage that I'm feeling and hearing and getting from it is that if you, let's say, need to leave work for 2 hours because you need to pick kiddos up from school and fix lunch or do other things, right? Then those threads and those conversations are there and they're organized in a way that you can go back to them later. So I think that the way I want to kind of start that piece of the talk is really around the culture that you have. Is that culture more pointed towards the asynchronous type of communication where maybe you're not is involved in things where quick decisions and conversation need to be had versus the type of work that you're doing every day?
Yeah. Vijay, from your perspective, do you feel like there are like companies that are transitioning from an in-office to a digital workplace that
Hmm.
were already asynchronous, or is the office by nature, every office culture is synchronous, and so it's gonna require a mindset shift to think about it in these terms?
Yeah, I think if you really need to switch to this, you need a little bit of planning, right? For
Yeah.
example, I think that whole impatience towards wanting to get decisions done quickly basically happens because we kind of like fly by the edge of our seats, and I think there is a lot of this. Okay, it's not happening. Okay, there's this artwork that needs to basically get approvals. It's not happening. Why is the other person not responding? And all those things happens. But if we do know that, so see, I can also see where this team is coming from. They seem to be a distributed team globally in 41 countries. So I can also see that they're kind of building, a tool for their own team to work with. And
Yeah.
I can see the value of that, right? Especially when there are people in different time zones. Working synchronously is really not an option at all, unless you put somebody else through some pretty interesting time zone differences. Uh, so yeah, I can see where this comes from, but in order for something like this to work, you also need to plan your teams accordingly. I think that in during the digital workplace day, I think there were a couple of conversations that were happening where people were saying that we have teams all over the place. We just plan our schedules accordingly, because you don't really need the other person there 12 hours a day when you're working. You probably just need them for maybe 10 minutes overlap, and you can make all the decisions that is needed.
Yeah, so let's look at what it means here to be a more asynchronous messaging platform. So it's still messaging, which we usually think of as synchronous or respond now, but they're saying, okay, no monitoring presence indicators to say like if you enter or out. Slack has like a do not disturb feature or I'm out of office feature. So they're saying they're not even going to start with that. Removing notifications, which is kind of a big thing that you see a lot in these types of things. No need for endless meetings. So yeah, replacing real-time calls with async threads. They're definitely like trying to push away from all those types of things. Let's quickly look at pricing, which is pretty modest. There they have the free plan that they mostly want people to use, and then if you want your history, you have to pay $5 per user. Which is pretty cheap, but it's also a pretty simple platform too, I would say.
Yeah.
All right, we'll come back and look at integrations in a bit. So let's actually jump into the platform here and see what we got. Okay, so on the left side, you're going to see an inbox, which is just basically all your notifications, some saved messages. So messages would be like your direct messages, and then everything else is going to be channels. If you're used to using Slack, this is probably not looking too different at this point.
Yeah.
Left navigation, the idea of channels is the same in both direct messages in Slack. So at this point, there's really not too much difference. Inbox is just going to be a a quick way to see everything you need to do. They're still kind of pushing this idea of getting back to inbox zero, which this is a nice feature. You can just kind of go through and say, yeah, I saw it, it's done, or jump in and see things as they come through. Any comments on just the basic navigation of the homepage?
I mean, it does have that familiar look to it. And, the thing I was thinking about as I was thinking about, okay, the way I work, and I was thinking about two of my team members specifically that are in the Philippines. So even though we have specific times of the day where we know we're all on line, and we can communicate in real time, there are areas where I was thinking, how would I want to distinguish certain channels and messaging threads based on that particular person and the topic? So I didn't really find anything that gave me more options or made me think about this differently than Slack, because even what we do over Slack is, I'll type something up, maybe it's 7 a.m., Pacific time on a Saturday, and then my team member, they'll respond to me when they get back to work. So I think there's another piece around how everyone manages their own work and thinks about, how they work, because I don't feel the pressure if I get a ping from Slack, to answer it right away. So that was my initial thought when, in looking at the screen in the beginning, first logging on, is that differentiation, right, of how do I look through my threads. But then I don't know if I necessarily feel pressure or not in Slack any different than I would in an asynchronous tool.
Yeah, this reminds me of a discussion I had with a team that was thinking about moving out of email. The people who really didn't want to move out of email had elaborate systems set up to make sure that every email that came in went to a folder. They were super organized with how it went on. They didn't get overwhelmed because they had made the system work for them. And so they felt very comfortable with it. They said, why would we ever want to get out of email? People who are a little bit more like letting email run the show, of letting it give all the notifications and feeling like I always had to respond to the first things, those are the people who are feeling the stress from it. I think Slack may be a similar thing. Vonda, you're saying like you've pretty much set it up to where it works for you and it works great, and you've created a system inside of it.
Yeah.
The one point that I would add is that I think there is also a difference between CXOs basically evaluating tools and how employees look at tools. I think we have an option of basically saying, hey, you know what, I'll look at it later. But there is this inherent expectation that maybe the bosses are all expecting me to respond immediately, especially with real-time tools. I think that's like a thing that we are hearing from, when we speak to a lot of people. I think Neil can probably add more on that.
Yeah. Vonda, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I think to your point, Vijay, that, it depends on how you're already managing, it for yourself, right? Because I could see, especially a person who has more focus, work and a way that they're thinking about their work, where Slack could be totally distracting. Because I've worked with engineers and people who hate it, but then I have architects who love it, right? And so I think that's one piece. But I think the other piece around how tools are being selected in that plan, right? And is the CISO or the CTO picking the tool, right? Or versus the people who are going to be using it the most. And all of that brings back culture, right? So what is that culture of the organization that even exists? So are people thinking, okay, if the CEO is sending me is sending a Slack message, do I need to respond right away? Versus, is this message specifically related to a time sensitive deliverable, right? So I think that there is that culture piece in terms of how companies already think about work, how they think about communication, how they think about messaging, and what the culture is driving. So if there's a culture, let's say as an example, where we say we respect, people's family and personal lives. And so we don't expect you to respond to emails if you're not working, unless it's, marked urgent, or you have an urgent role, like, in resilience or incident management or something. So I think that culture is the strong piece to think about here, if you were going to be adding it, and then the other tools that we discuss as well.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I totally agree. And this is a great example of which one wins out. Is it the stated culture that you have, or is it the tool that you adopt? I think if you have a weak culture, the tool tells you what your culture is going to be. If you don't have agreements about what it means to work at home and with family, and you're on Slack, then you're kind of assuming that you need to be answering those things. Or if you're on email, you need to be answering those things. Whereas if you have a strong culture, then you can make Slack work for you no matter what. Like that's not going to overcome it. I don't know if someone has a weak culture and they start using Twist, do they automatically have a more asynchronous thing, or do people say, "Shoot, I'm just going to use messages all the time," and they can bend that to their will too? It's a good question.
Oh, everybody's going to be very frustrated. Yeah, because I think the culture just tells you like what to expect and what not to expect. And I think people are going to basically think like, hey, where is everybody? Like, why isn't anybody responding? I think people are going to be very frustrated about it.
Yeah. This again is some more, and something I think is important for everyone that's looking at digital workplace tools, to recognize what the bias is of the tool that you're using. Every tool has a bias. You have to figure out what it is. Twist, thankfully, tells you exactly what their bias is. They said don't use messages. Like it says right here, it's a good way to chat in private and be social. Threads are the best option for on-topic discussions you can link to and keep in the open. By default, start a thread. So open communication, working in public, threaded conversations. Obviously, they're saying that's how they want you to do it. They even have a link here where they're going to talk about what messages are, when you should use them, when you should not use them. So I mean, they're pretty heavy-handed on some of this. Even if I think it's the same thing. If I try to start a conversation with somebody new, don't expect an immediate response. I actually like this a lot, where it says, "Don't just say, 'Hey, are you there?' but ask your full question and check back in later." That's good advice, I would say. But again, it's nice that they've built the bias into the product, I would say.
Yeah, I also liked the little things that they're done. For example, I was typing Neil you a message to just check this thing out, and when I hit enter, it didn't send by default. It basically came to the, it basically said type. So it's allowing you. The assumption here is that okay, you're going to send all your messages out, and you're not going to basically keep sending hi, enter. Are you there? Enter. So you're not sending those rapid, quick fire messages, but you're basically going to think through. But this is at the phrase that comes to mind when I see this thing is like thoughtful communication. Like that's what comes to mind when I see this whole thing.
That is a pretty amazing feature there, that if I hit enter, I'm just going to get a new line. I have to, either click on that button or hit command enter for it to go.
But the thing that I come to, like, I remember there was another company that was basically building this mind map alternative tool. And the question I always have is that, like, how many people are there who basically will think about something, put thought early on, like, like the Amazon, create a memo before you come to a meeting kind of a thought process, versus like, okay, you know what, we're going to state the agenda, we're going to like brainstorm left, right, and center, and we're going to throw all sorts of ideas and something is going to emerge out of that. And most startups work in that kind of a culture, right? Like, hey, the uncertain is taken for granted, and we're going to like, the whole move fast and break things, figure out what works, keep doing more of that, and throw things around. So I'm just thinking from that point of view how this tool fits into such a dynamic.
Go ahead, Vonda.
Yeah. I'm thinking about it too. And one of the things that came to mind was, do you remember when Skype first came out and they were like, this is going to replace email? Do y'all remember that? Right? I mean, I know it was a long time ago, right? And then when Microsoft Teams, Skype on steroids, right, came out, then that was going to replace email, right? And Slack was going to replace email. And so one of the things that like comes to mind is it goes back to if it's in startup mode, right? So it, like our companies, right? Still in startup mode, I call it, right? Where you are failing fast, you are changing direction. You know, I had a meeting with an IP attorney 2 weeks ago, and she made me shake up and change a whole bunch of things that I have to do differently, right? And so when I think about the different conversations that I'm having with my team and different people, and that the dynamics of the conversation, how quick they're happening, you know, I wouldn't go out of Slack or leave an email thread to come in here to start a new conversation if this wasn't something that a company was already using, and then I came and joined it and they were like, "Hey, here's what we do for, you know, this other type of communication." Because like you saying, Vijay, in that mode, right? You're switching strategies, you're changing, you're dropping a product, adding a product. You know what I mean? You're in different development phases for your different things that you're working on. And
Yeah.
so that's the other piece that's really coming to mind.
Good. Let's look at the channels for a little bit, and then we'll get into like what would make somebody want to use this product. So channels is where they want you to do most things. Like they've said, don't do messages. Spend more time here. This is just a general public channel. So anytime you want to have a conversation, you have to start a thread. Whereas in Slack, you're just going to put a message out, and then people can thread it optionally. Here, you can see like this could get pretty long and hefty, but you would still be able to see the major topics that are there. Then you click on something that comes in, and then everyone just kind of types in, and it goes down as you roll through. So you can say, and again, you're going to need enter is going to go down. So either click or put it go through. So everything is going to be threaded in this way. And if you want to get out of the thread, you go back to general. So again, not like a brand new topic or feature or something you've never seen in another product, but just the way they force the threads on you from the start is interesting and shows their bias as well.
That's a funny term, forced threads.
Yeah, that's true.
So one of the questions I had in mind was that, for example, an idea can start out pretty well thought out, or it could start off with a germ, right? I'm wondering with this whether this mode of working will basically stop people from basically saying, you know what, it's asking me to write a full-fledged thing, I haven't flushed it out yet. So is that really going to be a hindrance towards basically people participating in, taking initiative to start new things? They'll probably chime in here and there, but is that going to be a deterrence? Is a question.
Yeah, I think could, because like I was even seeing here, can you change this title? Like if I just have a random thought, but then I realize that through the course of the conversation, we're talking about something else. So you can change the title, but it's a little bit hidden. It's not something you're going to necessarily do all the time. You can also close the threads, archive them, and move them around. Yeah.
Yeah. Strangely enough, there is no search feature. Like, for example, somebody could have mentioned something odd in one of the threads, which maybe the title is not very obvious about. But I couldn't find a very obvious search feature where I can search through all of the channel messages and find out where the thread is.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't use the search too much.
That brings up a good point, because for me, even when I think about like how I organize, my regular files, right? For me, I sometimes forget like the main category. So to your point, Vijay, right? Trying to type in random words for a search. Like I was looking at somebody was researching specific women in tech stats, but I was trying to compare 2021 stats to 2019 stats. So I was typing in like different keywords, and I still couldn't find it. And so when you're in thread mode, right? How that would be interesting. So let's say we had a conversation 3 months ago, and we were going back like, oh, remember we were talking about, this particular topic. If you can't readily and easily search and you don't remember which thread it's in because of the name, right? Or even the channel, because I find myself, typing in random words, even in using Google Workspace, right? To find something. But because it will show me, okay, these are all the documents where that word is, it's like, oh, well, I knew it was a PowerPoint presentation versus, just a note or something.
Yeah. Good point. Let's talk about who might use this, want to use this, because I think Vijay's point here is correct. Anyone who's already happy with Slack, there's no reason they're going to do this. So somebody who is going to do it might either really buy into the async narrative. They're like full out for that, or they really are feeling burnt out from Slack. They haven't established those good norms, and they feel like Slack is working against their culture, and they want to come to something simpler. But I guess my question would be, if they do decide that they want to move out of Slack because they're not happy with it, what do they lose by coming to Twist?
Well, my first thought, because it looks like, Vijay, you were still thinking through it, but my first thought was that this would be a really good tool for a newly established team that wants to really have communication and conversation around only like one or two or three topics, where everybody is sort of like, this is a new project, a new effort, a new endeavor, and let's have all the conversation around these one, two, or three things right here. And I think it's also around maybe organization and discussion and decision making, as opposed to where everything I think about Slack, I not only think about it in that standpoint, but I think about it in just my everyday work and messaging. So that's the first thing that comes to mind, like in terms of that piece of the way that you asked the question for me, Neil.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Vijay? Would somebody be disappointed, or would they feel like they were compromising by switching to Twist?
So the way that I think about it, right? Like if you kind of think about like what all do you require, like what are the tools that you require in order to get work done, especially if you're going to be a distributed round the world team, right? There are probably a couple of things that you require. You probably require a communication tool, which is what I would basically classify this as. You probably require a collaboration tool, and then you probably require like a productivity, something, employee engagement, this thing, right? Tools in place. I mean, if you put all of them together, you'll probably get a digital workplace. But this is one piece of that thing. What I was really, really kind of surprised was, but that the Twist by itself basically does X. But the minute you basically start using their project management tool and start integrating with it, I think you suddenly get like 1.5, 2x more power in order to do the things that you want to do. I'm just a little surprised that they haven't basically like made it very obvious that you have to integrate with Todoist. Maybe they're basically saying that we don't want to tightly integrate it, but if people want to use Asana or if they want to use Trello, let them do it. But I do wish that they had done that a little bit more. I finally found out where the search feature is, by the way, but that's a different story.
Yeah, I think that's where it breaks down for me. And again, I feel like we're not really doing this review to say like, oh, you have to use Twist for these circumstances, because we come back to that contextual collaboration thing again. Eventually, you're going to be like, if you're using this to come in and out of your project management tool to have a conversation about the work, like you just do it in your project management tool. Like that's going to happen there. A standalone messaging application really should be more for this kind of like spontaneous conversations. Like if you're talking about work, you're talking about deep things about work, like you should kind of have places for that. Maybe you could use this more for like high level strategic thinking. Like ClickUp's bias is that everything's a project. and not everything is a project. Like there are some kind of maybe strategy discussions that are better held outside of a project management platform. But yeah, I think in general, you're going to run up against those same problems with contextual collaboration.
I would also think that this is a little bit straitjacketed because I'm just thinking about some of the other Slack channels or some of the other tools that I know and what are the channels that are available there. Like every company actually has a channel called Water Cooler, for example, right? Or there's like a friends group or a bikers group or something around hobbies and stuff like that. People are not going to be writing like long posts on what they're planning to do and stuff like that. Like I think you have to allow for that certain serendipitous, like casual conversations to happen in an organization. And if this is going to be your communication hub where all of your employees are connecting, it is a little bit straitjacketed. It kind of feels like here are a whole bunch of PhD folks, and there is going to be a very systematic approach to solving a problem, and everything is going to be a memo, right? So work doesn't happen that way. It's human beings at the end of the day. I do wish that this tool had kept a little bit of provision for something like that.
Yeah, I think it's so funny because every comment, and as we talk through each piece, to me it still keeps coming back to the culture of the organization, right? And does this tool actually fit the culture? Because as you were saying, water cooler and biking and all the different channels of larger companies, I'm thinking, yeah, because usually sometimes people just post a cool picture, right? And it's just like on the biking channel or the hiking channel, it's somebody standing on a mountain doing like that, right? And you're like, oh, cool, right? It's not like a conversation that needs to happen. But even when it comes to strategy, right? How are strategy conversations held in organizations? What does that process look like, right? And yeah, I think it would scare, some zillennials, right, that just want to ask a quick question or want to say something. They're like, oh, that's for the old people. I could easily see somebody saying, that's for the old people, right? Because where's the emojis? And where's the pictures? And where's the engagement? So
they're all there. I saw that.
Right,
The jiffies and
right.
all are there.
Okay, but
they're
it goes
hidden.
back to the culture. It's hidden, and it goes back to engagement, right? And the culture of that organization. And if people would just jump on and use it. Straight jacketed, though. I love that. It
term.
puts you in a box. It puts you in a box.
And I think a lot of people, like, their favorite part of Slack is not even like the features of Slack. It's all the extra stuff that's there. It's all like the extra apps. You can use the Donut app to like sync up people. Like there's this huge ecosystem there. And so I agree with you, Vonda. I would say I would take a strong culture using Slack the way they want to versus just forcing everyone to use Twist in order to promote a certain type of culture. I admire Twist and what they're doing, and some of these features are really cool. And seeing a well thought through and they hit what they were trying to do. But in terms of actually working, I would take Slack plus a strong culture about how we're going to use it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like this conversations could technically, like when you're actually running a project. I know that this is a conversation that we had in the last when we were reviewing the previous one as well, right? So what SWIT, right? So we were mentioning that about how, like when there is a project management, if the conversation happens around the project or the task, then it's contextual. And if there's a contextual discussion that is happening, which is essentially a convergence or a divergence, at some point that divergence has to basically arrive at a conclusion, right? And some of the things that are required in terms of, like maybe I want to do a democratic process and say, hey, there are 5 people involved in this team, like hey, which is the icon that we should go up with, right, for this product release. Like you do require some of those small things, features, saying that okay, maybe I need a polling feature, maybe I need like a suggestion feature and things like that, which is still not there yet. So should this conversation all be happening here, or should it be happening inside their project management tool where all the conversations are connected to that? Like this being two separate products seems a little bit odd, actually.
Good. Well, I've learned a lot through this conversation. I'm glad we do these in real time because it really helps me to think more about like what it means to have these. Because I mean, even like I love the narrative of async. Like I love the discussion around it and saying like, yeah, this is a more sane way to work. Yet at the same time, to see a tool that is like totally dedicated to that narrative and that mindset, and realize, I don't know, like maybe it's we left something out. Like that's really helpful to see, I think.
Yeah.
I think. Go ahead, Wanda.
No, I'm gonna say exactly to your point. But like they left something out, or it's just in the conversation around who should use it. It just hasn't been framed right in a way to help you think why I would use it, right? And so I think and even how when you come onto their page and they say why use Twist, they don't give me enough to me the like to say, oh, to have that light bulb, right? But that's why these conversations are good, because we all have a different perspective, a way that we would use it, a way that we think about it, and then we go ahead and have it. But yeah, what were you going to say, Vijay?
Yeah, like I was basically saying that there are certain things that we have kind of like have come to expect from communication and social media platforms. Like for example, if I were to write this elaborate post about a project, right, and then I say that hey, next week we're going to be having a conversation about it, I would like to know how many people read it. Like because time and time again you get into a meeting and people say, oh, I missed that email. So, like, hey, seen by XYZ or at least a number of people so that I know that people are coming to the meeting prepared would phenomenally help me. And I think that's the reason why Amazon prints out the memo and gives it to everybody and says, okay, here's 15 minutes, please read it. Then we're all on the same wavelength, right? But if you're going to do all of those things digitally, then there has to be a way to kind of at least get a sense of like how people read it. If not, then I should schedule time in my during the meeting to kind of give everybody time to read it. So those things are not there yet. So we're kind of assuming that everybody has this perfect work ethic and culture where everybody does their job perfectly. I think that might be a little bit idealistic. I think the kind of companies that might be able to use this brilliantly might be a very, very small niche.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. I remember from David Heimeyer Hansen's quote during our digital workplace days, like, we're not trying to get to utopia. Like it was horrible before. It's not going to suddenly be amazing. Like we just need to get a little bit better than it was. And I would say like, yeah, Slack is not utopia, but you can find ways to put some effort into creating a better culture, creating better working agreements. You don't necessarily have to have the product lead you all the way there.
Yeah, and the deal is also that you don't have companies of self-starters and self-initiated folks, right? I think the tool has to nudge a little bit here and there. Otherwise, the onus falls on the manager to be the nag. I would rather that the tool nags them.
That's true. There are definitely a couple of those notifications inside Twist I would pick up and put into Slack if I could like customize those. Those are nice. Yeah. I like that. Cool. Any other final thoughts, Vonda, from you?
No, I mean, I think, this tool and the others, my final thought is it really, as the leader of the organization, it's really important to make sure you understand, the tools that align to what your team is using, what works well for them, and then think of all of that in conjunction with the culture. But I was thinking, like, don't let the tool drag you around by the neck, right? So whatever the tool is, whether it's Slack, whether it's Twist, whatever, don't let the tool, dictate how your organization, lives out its mission and does its work, right? Make sure that you're using the tool to enhance your work, right? And to optimize things, but also don't expect the tool to save the world, right? It's just a piece of technology that somebody had an idea and put together and said, hey, here's some problems I think we can solve. So yeah, that's my thoughts around it.
Love that. Vijay, what about for you? Final thought?
Yeah, I think the more that we are reviewing all these products, I think we're realizing that it's just not the tech or the utility, but it's also the culture and the leadership and how much training everybody basically gets. And what is it that innate characteristics and traits of employees and what their work ethics are. I think all of those basically get bundled in, right? Like it's just not the tech piece alone. So yeah, I think any organization that's basically picking a tool will have to look at all of those things in place and say that, hey, we are an organization which has a culture of having to do multiple follow-ups. This is not going to work. But on the other hand, if you have a team, where everybody is pretty much self-motivated, they kind of run on their own steam. And I think a company like Twist, for example, they're bootstrapped, they've been around for a long time, and they basically are, like Zoho, they're basically building out this long tail, long-term plan of basically changing work. I think they have found a tribe, like, just like how Basecamp has found that tribe of 40, 50 people. Maybe it's a very slow, over a period of time, they gathered those tribesmen and women. But, does that really work for every other company out there? I think that's an interesting question to ask.
Yeah, it's good. Well, it's always a pleasure to talk to both of you. Thank you for helping me through this, and it's good to do this. We'll do it again soon.
Look forward.
Sounds good.